Hello and welcome to the Future of Strategy. My guest this morning is Simon Paris. Simon, as you will know, is the Chief Executive Officer of Finastra. He has a real passion for SMEs and for sustainable trade, and has done a huge amount with Finastra as a thought leader and as a technology expert himself, and also through the World Trade Board to promote a sustainability and SME agenda. Simon, it's a huge pleasure and a huge privilege to have you with us today. I wanted to start by asking you a very simple question, which is, how have you seen the world change for SMEs over the last few months? I mean, there's been such a huge crisis of trade and of confidence in the global economy, really. How have you seen the market change?
Yeah, well, first of all, Rebecca, hi, and thank you for having me on your program, if I can call it that, and thank you for everything you've been doing as well to support the World Trade Board and the SME agenda. So coming back to your question, which is how have we seen the world change over these last few months? I mean, clearly a pandemic has been traumatic and dramatic for SMEs around the world. If we just start out in the UK, at the early stage of the crisis, many SMEs didn't even have enough cash to last another 2 weeks. Right, that is dramatic. So I think that the sovereign state, the government stepping in to really provide support, and as you know, they gave £40 billion in bounce back loans and around another 17 billion in the so-called CBILS, or the COVID business interruption loans. That was incredibly necessary. However, and it's important, however, the cost of those loans were averaging, 5.1% compared to the Bank of England interest rate of 0.1%. So again, I think it was very helpful, but also maybe a little bit expensive. If you zoom out of the UK and you look across Europe, 2/3 of employment in Europe really come from SMEs. So this is something we really, really need to care about. If you take a sentiment check right now, a large part of these, almost 11%, think they won't make it past 6 months. Almost half of them don't think they'll make it past 12 months. So the crisis has not passed for these SMEs. We are right in the middle of it now. And if you go globally, you look at the US, it's a similar picture. The rate of insolvencies is forecast to increase by almost 60%. And 50% of all SMEs in America think they are under significant financial strain. So it is traumatic and dramatic. It was, and it still is.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, this is affecting SMEs in the developed world. We know, and I'm an SME as well. I know how difficult it is maintaining cash flow. There's also been a crisis of confidence almost in the insurance sector, hasn't there? So that's affected the way in which SMEs are being financed, particularly in their trade.
Yes, no doubt about it. So I think as you think about trade and trade finance, as you said, the insurance has had a crisis of confidence, but nonetheless, the need to reduce costs, to reduce friction, to make the whole process more seamless has probably been accelerated through the crisis, because we've got to reduce the barriers to trade.
Exactly. So how do we do that? Because Finastra has a lot of expertise in this space and provides a platform as a service solution to banks who are supporting SMEs. How are you connecting the banks more with their SME client base?
Yeah, so great question. We are a cog in the wheel. That's all we are. We're just one cog in the wheel. But we can play our part as a cog in the wheel. We can really say, you know what? The combination of technology and policy and corporates and financiers in the form of banks in this case, if we come together smartly, and you said it in your introduction, if we come at it smartly, then we can help improve sustainable trade, free trade, fair trade, open trade. But the really biggest thing to resolve is the access to affordable finance. So it's the SME trade financing gap that I personally care most about. Now we can make it lower barriers to entry, but we also need to make more abundant finance available. Now, if we all link arms and link hands, we can do that by showing, the legal identity identifier of the companies we're financing. We can help with KYC and AML, etc. We can do a lot, but we need to do it together. And that's why, as you know, we founded the World Trade Board, and why we're delighted to have you on the board with us.
Well, I'm delighted to be there too, and it's a privilege to hear those words being spoken, I think, because the importance here, as you say, is collaboration, isn't it? So
Yeah.
we're all working together, and the bank requirements are shifting all the time. Is this actually a technological problem? Because it feels to me as though there's a real appetite now to solve this problem. And just to put that in numbers for our audience, I mean, the International Chamber of Commerce says that's around 1.5 trillion US dollars. The World Economic Forum, never to be undersold, claims that it's 2.5 trillion US dollars. So we've got this massive gap across the world, and it's the developed world, as you've just said, as well as the emerging world. So is the solution a technological one? Because we know for banks it's very expensive bringing on that SME sector because the risks are so high.
Yeah, so technological problem, technological solution. I think you use the word earlier. It really is requiring greater degrees of collaboration. Whether it's 1.5 trillion or 2.5 trillion, it is hundreds of millions of people kept in poverty for longer than is required. And unless we help them step out of poverty into prosperity, we will continue to see massive migration flows. So it's also a political challenge. It's policy, it's access to finance, it's focusing on free, fair, and sustainable trade. It's securing the provenance of a good and service. It's providing the technology, but it's also government stepping in to understand that hundreds of millions of people locked into poverty on our doorstep is not and never will be a good thing.
So this is also about financial inclusion, isn't it? So,
Really.
I mean, what are the mechanisms that we go about making sure that there is financial inclusion in the world? Because we haven't really touched on emerging markets, but some of our sessions are about emerging markets. We have huge challenges out there. How do we do that?
Yes, no, very nicely said. So you'll notice in my opening comments, I spoke about the UK, Europe, and America deliberately. But what we need to do in equal measure is talk about the emerging geographies, right? So we estimate that there are maybe 1.7 billion people who are either unbanked or underbanked. And the majority of those, more than a billion, are women. So as you think about exclusion or the need for greater inclusion, we need to go to the source of the challenge, which is think about how do we bring fair and available finance to those underbanked and unbanked people, maybe even starting with women, maybe even starting in sectors like agriculture. If we can show people what is a fair market price for their goods or produce, then maybe we can bring more transparency and more fairness to trade.
I think it's really interesting because one of the themes of the conference is obviously going to be sustainability as well. And this whole idea around financial inclusion, social enterprise even, and supporting those companies that are trying to do good from the bottom up. That's a whole area that's very difficult to bank because the risks are very high. And I think we have to go back to that key question, which is how do we reduce those risks? How do we make sure that money does drive through? Because we've seen through COVID a drop in remittances. That has an effect for women on the ground trying to set up businesses to build their communities. And again, it's something that we need to think about as a sector, isn't it?
It really is. And you use the word sustainable, and it reminds us all that, there's a great deal of power in our hands as the consumer. If I want to buy my partner a ruby, for example, I can pay more attention to make sure that's not a blood diamond or a blood ruby, that it's been sustainably resourced. Or if I want to buy palm oil, I can make sure that the oil has been produced not from slash and burn farming in Malaysia, but by sustainable farming. So I think as business people and as consumers, as citizens in society, we can all play our role in making sure that when we spend our money as consumers, we're doing so in a very thoughtful and deliberate way to encourage that sustainability, to encourage that inclusion, and maybe focus on the women who are unbanked and underbanked in particular.
So my question has to be, how do we nudge people? How can I mean, I'm an economist, so I make no apology for that. Well, maybe I should, but there's always a demand side and a supply side. How do we make sure that the supply side, which is the technology and the money and the oil, the data oil, if you like, getting to the SMEs, getting to the people on the ground, how do we make sure that nudges sustainable behavior and helps with this whole SME and inclusivity agenda?
Yeah. I always believe that humans make their decisions in a circle. We go awareness, consideration, decision, action. So where we need to spend more time is on awareness. If we can put information into people's hands and say, hey, did you know that this palm oil is from slash and burn farming, or this diamond is a blood diamond, or the provenance of this good or service is dubious, then at least the people are aware of the challenge and can make a choice. They can consider their decision and their action. Awareness, consideration, decision, action. Now, technology can play a great role in that. I see my children with their phones zapping the barcodes of products to see whether the product has too many artificial ingredients or whether it's bad for them. We can leverage existing technology to make the consumers and businesses more aware of what they're actually doing.
So it sounds as though you have a very positive vision of the way the world looks in the future. What does the future hold for the next few years for SMEs, given where we are at the moment? If you look over the next 12 months and then beyond that, what does the future look like and how can we get there?
Yeah, no, I am an optimist, a realist, but also an optimist. So I think a number of things will play true. One is I think there'll be a massive explosion in the speed of digitization of all business processes related to trade. And that will see us hopefully eliminating more of the costs, which are typically paper-based and human-based and bureaucracy-based, that are the barriers to trade, and eliminating those with seamless digital processes. And I think the role of the World Trade Organization, the International Chamber of Commerce that John Denton leads, all of these things will be incredibly meaningful to reduce the barriers to trade. I think that will happen. I think we'll also see digitalization of business processes. So people can go beyond their four walls and invoke other people's business processes. So people can, from a bank, look at KYC, look at AML, look at provenance, look at legal entity identifiers, and that will be relevant as the second step. And the third, I think, will be much more access to financing. And I think if we can collaborate across all the stakeholders you mentioned earlier, across those three areas, what will happen inevitably can happen sooner.
I think it's marvellous. You're so positive. And to summarise, it's about simplification, cost reduction, it's about technology, it's about inclusivity, and it's about streamlining trade. I think that's a very upbeat message to finish on. Simon, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate your contributions. And I know our audience today will be very stimulated by what you said. Thank you.
My pleasure, Rebecca. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.